Thank you, Chad. Let's give Chad a hand here. If you guys haven't met Chad yet, you definitely want to spend the time to try to get on his calendar, because that will be very well worth your time. So as Chad said, I am one of the partners here in the corporate group. I'm the deputy head of our group. We represent lots of great companies like the ones out there today, and like the ones represented on this panel. When I saw this topic around corporate culture, so I come from a computer science background as well. Actually, I was a developer first before I was an attorney. And I like everything to be very precise and contained and well-defined. And when I looked at this topic, I really couldn't get my arms around it. Just because in some sense, it's a vague concept, and it's something that I think everyone talks about at some level, but I'm not sure we're all talking the same language. And I think it'd be helpful for us to understand what each of us is trying to achieve in culture in our own corporate environments. So with that context, I thought we would maybe first introduce each of ourselves. So again, Harold, you partner here at Oric, and then maybe we just go down the road here with David.
I'm David Vick. I was a coach at Zappos.com, and presently I'm a Chief Strategy Officer for Riviera Partners, a recruiting firm, and we're really killing it. And I'm an advisor to some other companies with strategy and culture. But strategy comes first, because if the business isn't positioned correctly, you can wrap a culture around it, but it's going to go nowhere. So, very, very important. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amy Chang, and I'm CEO and founder of an early stage venture, so this topic is very near and dear to my heart right now. We're only 10 people, so lots and lots of room to set the culture. But before that, I actually joined the board of Informatica, which is a public company, and setting culture there at that macro level has been quite interesting as well. And I sit on the digital advisory councils for Target and Accenture. So that's another slice where you've got a company that's 180, 200,000 people. And how do you move the culture from where it is to where you want it to be, particularly in the space around innovation. I spent 8 years before that at Google, building and running Google Analytics. So that team, when I joined, was 6 core engineers, and myself as the only product person. When I left, we built it to a few hundred, and we were covering 70% of the web. So that was a fun and wild ride, but we had our own culture inside of Google as well. So that was another interesting kind of take on it. And lastly, I advise several high growth companies like Optimizely, ClearSlide, OrganiLogic, and some others. So.
Hey everyone, John Bischke. I'm the CEO of Entelo. We're a relatively early stage company. We're 21 people today, but growing very fast. We were 7 people 7 months ago. So in that early stage kind of inflection point in growth. So thinking a lot about culture. What we do is we're basically a search engine for talent. So if any of you out there are looking for engineers, designers, data scientists, my guess is there might be a few of you looking for those folks. Entelo crawls the web, finds places where people are putting interesting information online about their capabilities, their skills, their expertise. Make it dead simple and easy for you to reach out to them, engage them, bring them into your company. So that's what we do.
Hi, my name is Lynn Perkins. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of UrbanSitter. We closed our Series B a couple of months ago, and we're definitely in growth mode right now. Before this, I worked for Joie de Vivre Hospitality, which consistently wins as one of the Bay Area's best places to work, especially for company culture. So I learned a lot there, and I've applied a lot of that to my new company. I've been at small companies that have gone public, and I've been at small companies that have gone under. So I think in terms of culture, I can sort of offer a wide range of what works and what doesn't work.
Hi, I'm Gary Swart. Up until 3 weeks ago, I was the CEO of oDesk. oDesk was the world's largest online workplace, and we built that company, took it from the jungle, dirt road, highway, and merged with the #2 player in the space, Elance. Prior to that, I had a character building experience at a startup called Entelo, and before that, I was at a little startup called IBM, and I got there via the acquisition of Rational Software. So I've seen everything from all stages, and I'm very passionate about the topic.
Great, well thank you. Okay, now your turn. So let's find out who here, who are you guys? Who are entrepreneurs, starting companies? Is that the category of people? Okay, how about investors? Okay, and others, engineers, angels, others? Okay, great, good. Okay, that's helpful. All right, so to start the conversation, I thought I would do what, if I asked my 9-year-old son what corporate culture was, what he would do, and he would go online and check Wikipedia. So here's the definition. Culture includes the organization values, visions, norms, working language, systems, symbols, beliefs, and habits. It is also the pattern of such collective behaviors and assumptions that are taught to new organizational members as a way of perceiving and even thinking and feeling. Organizational culture affects the way people and groups interact with each other, with clients, and with stakeholders. So David, you've written a book on this topic. What do you think? Is this kind of what we're talking about? Are we defining this properly? How do we think about this conversation?
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Just to boil it down, it's like what you do and how you do it. And if you have it customer-centric, pretty soon that'll become your brand. That's what you're going to be known by. And it's just getting everybody moving in the right direction, moving forward. It includes the language, the thoughts, decisions, actions, all aligned with the vision and purpose and values.
Others, any thoughts on how to define this? Or
If you go to the very next definition on Google, it comes down to the perception of how it feels to work at the company by the employees themselves. So you as the leader can define it, you can act a certain way, but it's really the perception of how the employees, what it feels like to them. What do they think about these things? And it's the job of the CEO to create an environment where everybody can do their best. So you not only have to get the right people on the bus, but you have to do a certain set of things, as we heard in the definition, in order to create that environment where everybody can thrive.
Great. Any other thoughts on that? So, good. So I think we've got an idea of what we're talking about. We're all thinking about starting companies or have done so. When I go to board meetings for my very early stage companies, we put up the deck for the agenda. And there's never a point on culture. I've never ever seen in a board meeting a discussion where that was an actual point or topic. So when should we be thinking about this, as we CEOs or founders are starting to build our companies? At what point do we start to think about this? How much is of this is kind of ingrained in every decision that we make from day one? Any other?
Yeah, I think the sooner the better, because any group of people, you're going to have a culture no matter what. But a lot of times it's not what you want. So if you start out, make a blueprint very intentionally of this is what we're doing, this is how we do it, and articulate it properly so everybody knows it and bake it into your DNA, then that's what's going to be the future of the company. Otherwise, it's going to become culture by default, and usually it's not what you want. You get what you get if it's not intentional.
I have to completely agree with that. So in month 2 of our life, and we were 3 people at that time, we sat down and actually defined literally what are our values, and let's keep them short, let's keep them tight, and let's make sure that we all know them and we all really and truly feel them. And we actually put them on posters inside of our office. So you'll see them up because they're constant kind of daily reminders of what we're trying to do and how deliberate we're trying to be about it.
And I definitely agree. I think there's a couple things that are interesting about this. So first off, I think it was Tony Hsieh when he was talking about the Zappos culture, and if you haven't read his book, Delivering Happiness, it's a phenomenal read. I think a must read for every entrepreneur. But one of the things that Tony said is, when you're defining your values, ideally your values are ones where when people Google that value, they come up with your website, right? So things like passion, integrity, I mean, these are all really important things, but they're kind of generic, right? They're things that everyone says in their mission statement. We have this, 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 and this. They don't really define your company. So think about the things that make your company unique, because when you think about culture, it's your competitive advantage. It's how you can sell your product to customers. It's how you can sell coming to work for you in a very competitive hiring market. So what is it about your culture that isn't just the nice to haves, the nice buzzwords, but the stuff that truly makes your company unique?
Can anyone share kind of any specifics around what are those specific values or, things that you're trying to imbue in the culture of your companies? I mean, what are the things that you put up on the blackboard and say, this is our culture?
I mean, I'm happy to tell you how we got to ours in our company.
Sure.
And I would agree, we started really early when there were just 6 of us, and we actually revisit them every time our company grows by a certain percent. And part of that is an exercise to get everyone involved, and part of it is to make sure that we still feel that we're embracing those values and that the newer hires feel them as well. So we went through an exercise that was kind of something I had taken from the hotel industry, where it started off really light and fun, where we went through and said, okay, let's come up with what is UrbanSitter. If we were 2 magazines, what would we be? And we went through this long process, and we came out with, we'd be Dwell Meets Consumer Reports. If we were a restaurant, what would we be? And when we came up with, we went through different things. If we were a car, and that was kind of fun. And then we sort of dove into core values, and we actually split up in teams. And at the beginning it was really small, and now we actually go back in bigger groups and reevaluate whether those are still the right values. But we actually went in separate teams, and it was really interesting to see how much overlap we had on our lists. And I think that's a really important thing. I think it's even an important thing to do when you're small and it's just you and a co-founder, or maybe you and 2 co-founders, because you quickly realize, are we aiming for the same thing long term? And if you're not, then you really need to reevaluate. And so from that, we came up with a list of 6 or 7 items, and we broke out in groups and kind of said, how do we apply this? Like, what does this mean as someone who works here? What does this mean as someone who uses our service? What does this mean as somebody who's a provider on either end of our marketplace? And are these all valid? And we continue to revisit those, and we actually have those up on our board presentations, and we constantly, at our board presentations, talk about how we feel. Like we do sort of a heat map, like where are we overall? Like, how are the co-founders feeling about things? How do we believe that the new hires feel about things? The people who are there in the middle. And we actually, we've had times, usually right before we raise a round of funding, where it's really hard and people are working 2 or 3 jobs, and I would say that overall we will tell the board honestly, like, hey, people are feeling pretty stressed, but overall everyone's still excited about the mission. And I think making that part of your board discussion also gives the board an insight to what it feels like to be at your company, because they don't get that every day.
Has anybody seen the Netflix deck? Show of hands on culture. Okay, so if your hand isn't up, go Google it and look at it. And we tried to get Patty McCord for this panel, because I think between her and Dr. Vic, there's few people who know more about setting up a great corporate culture. But the Netflix culture isn't for everybody. The Netflix culture is good for people who have the personal characteristics and the motivation to work in that culture. And if you don't know what those things are, if you don't define them, how are you going to get the right people on the bus in the first place? So as a founder, as an early CEO, even as a late stage CEO, you have to know what those things are so you know what to interview for. So I'm diving into a sort of a deeper topic here, but people hire mostly on skills and knowledge when they should be hiring mostly on personal characteristics and motivation. If people don't have the personal characteristics that you want in your culture, you're never going to change that. There's a million quotes for this. You can't coach height. You can teach a chicken to climb a tree, but you're better off getting a squirrel in the first place. You might as well look for squirrels, but in order to know what a squirrel is, you have to know what it is that you're looking for. And then the second is the motivation. If you're a customer-centric business, somebody's got to be passionate about customer centricity, or they're not going to be a right fit on your bus. So I think that it is impossible to get the right people on the bus if you don't know what the characteristics are, the motivation. If somebody comes in and says, look, I just want to make a ton of money, you're starved, you don't have a ton of money. You may have a ton of money if the company is successful and you have stock options, but you're going to be working at half salary for the next 2 years until we raise a C round or B round or whatever it is. So why get... See, I'm talking so much, I lost it. You have to have the right personal characteristics and motivation, and then skill and knowledge.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, when you set, thank you, Gary, that's perfect. When you set the expectations to attract employees, you let them know what they're getting into. And if they're into that, they'll be attracted to that. And then after time, or over time, that becomes self-managing. The culture becomes self-managing, because like attracts like, and the people that don't fit in, they start to leave, and you get more and more of the same of what's a reflection of the values and what's on your culture deck. So there's really no surprises, and then you have everybody moving in the right direction that have really the same feelings and understanding and commitment to what they signed up for.
And I think that the difficult trade-offs here are talent is hard enough to come by in the Valley, especially technical talent. And if someone is sitting in front of you with the skills and the knowledge, and you're so tempted to hire them even if they're 20, 30 degrees off, right? They're a decent enough person, it's not as if they have no social skills or no kind of way to talk to other human beings. It's not that bad, but it's somewhere in the middle where they're not quite the right fit, and you feel it. You know it in your gut, but you're so tempted to hire them because you need people to actually build this product, right? And your pipeline is probably not as robust as a Google's or an Amazon's or some of the other places where they have a lot of full-time recruiters. And I will say that is the hardest thing. So you're going to bed at night and you're thinking about, should I hire this guy? Should I give him an offer or not? Because I'm really torn. We really need his skill set on board. So we made one early hiring mistake very early on where we kind of were tempted and we did it. And we had to actually let him go within a month. So the one thing I will say is if you're going to take some risk on that front, be ready also to let people go with a reasonable severance package and make sure you take care of them. But if you're going to take some risk there, be open to that.
What was the issue? So what did you miss? What did you miss in the interview, and what was the issue?
We didn't miss it so much as deliberately decide we so needed a UI UX person that even though personality-wise this person wasn't the best fit, we figured, you know what, over time we will adjust to each other and it will be fine. And we'd met probably 12 other candidates who didn't have the skills.
What was the personality issue? I'd love to hear the use case.
It was snarkiness. It was snarkiness.
So your culture has a no snarky.
We have no assholes. Excuse my language. Yes. That is one of the signs up, and it's a-holes because we have children who sometimes come to visit the office. So it says no a-holes, but it's a sign, and it's up on our wall because we don't want snarky people.
So I think the other thing that happens a lot in interviews is sometimes you miss things, right? So you miss something that wouldn't be a good fit with your culture. And one of the things that we've done is we actually, for a very high percentage of our hires, you can do this early stage, harder as you scale, is we've had people come and work in the office for a while with us before we've made them an offer. We were out to dinner last night with some of our customers, and one of our customers is Weebly, and they actually do this thing called Trial Week. So every employee at Weebly has worked at Weebly for 1 week, full week, before they join Weebly. And so people ask this question, well, how does that work? I mean, how can, someone's gainfully employed, how do they come and work for, Weebly for a week? And Weebly actually encourages them to take one of their weeks of vacation and come work for Weebly. And they pay them, a nice amount of money for that week. And they say, in that other week of vacation, you can take a really nice vacation because you got paid for your other week of vacation. And it really helps them to identify, does this person fit in at Weebly? And their close rate, I don't think I can disclose it, but their close rate when they make an offer is like higher than any company I've ever heard. Because once the person's embedded and they see how fun it is to work at Weebly, now they're fired up. They want to come work there. So it's something that doesn't work for everyone, but it's an interesting experiment around culture fit.
Great. Well, why don't we pause and see if the audience has any questions around this initial topic of defining the company culture at the beginning. Yes. Yes.
Excuse me, added that one. I just heard on Automatic on WordPress. They have a similar thing, but they actually do, because they're all remote, they do 6 weeks of paid work, and they encourage them not to quit their job and just come up with a defined project, 20, 30 hours, that they're working on the side before they quit to make sure they can even work in that type of environment. So they also do that kind of paid.
Yeah.
Just do it for free.
It's really smart if you can do it, but it also has downsides. So for example, you can't do that and hire H-1Bs because they can't contract, right? So, and there's a lot of people that simply wouldn't do that. If you're competing for talent and someone's got 4 full-time offers, and then you're like, well, hey, just come here and work for a week, you may lose them. So, there's pros and cons, but I think it's something that more companies are experimenting with now.
Well, that could be self-selecting.
True. Mm-hmm. Which is why they probably have a high hit rate when they make an offer.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, right here.
Yeah. I was wondering, could you comment on the roles that the founders, early employees, or employees who come later on board, how their influence on the culture?
I think the question is, can we comment on the roles of founders and then versus early employees and what their respective roles are in implementing the company culture?
Well, I definitely don't think it's a linear shaped curve, right? It's for sure kind of exponential decay. Where that number is it at 5, is it at 10, is it at 50? I think it varies by company, from what I can tell. But the first 10, the first kind of core 10, are exceedingly important. And so we built slowly towards the first 10 and made sure that we were deliberate, and the one mistake we did make, we fixed it fast. But I think the first 10 set the culture, and then incrementally from there, you know, you keep going.
I would agree, and I actually feel pretty strongly that the people that you hire right after the co-founders, so maybe your first 5 or 6 hires that aren't part of the co-founding team, they play an incredibly important role, and they're actually one of the toughest roles in the company because they put in time as if they're a co-founder and they're there for all the early decisions, but they don't get a lot of the notoriety or attention for that. And I think as the founders, it's really important that you constantly recognize them and make sure that even as your company grows, even if where their level is changes and they're not at the top of their department, that you do special things for those people, or you make sure that you're reaching out to them, because I think they really can maintain that culture and make sure that it's staying that way, especially as your role gets bigger as a co-founder and you're not in the office all the time. It would just be my advice on those first few hires. Not only are they really important, but even when you're 200 people, 300 people, having them there and having them still believe in the mission and feel integral in the mission is really important.
Yeah, I think, you know, you're building, you're architecting, you're building a house or a building or, you know, a business that's got to rest on a really strong foundation. And if you have a weak foundation, the more floors you add, it's going to topple. And so that foundational layer has to be bedrock. It's got to be really, really strong. And you also have to recognize that some people are good at different stages of a business. We had an exceptional employee early on at oDesk who was phenomenal. He was MacGyver. He was scrappy. He was creative. He was a get-it-done guy. And I'd say he operated really well in the jungle with a machete in each hand. But as soon as he got into the Jeep, right, because now we had some dirt roads and we needed a Jeep, he couldn't drive a Jeep. He'd grab his machetes and he was cutting people. You know what I mean? Like, so picture this metaphor of a guy who was phenomenal in the jungle, and he came to me and said he was leaving. And my initial reaction, I spent the first 10 minutes thinking, I've got to convince him to stay. This guy, we need him. And the more I started thinking as we were having our conversation and started hearing about his motivation and what it is that he wanted to do, he wanted to get back in the jungle. He wanted to go be employee number 5 at a new company, and you know what? That was a better fit for him. So I think you have to recognize that sometimes you have that bedrock, all of the right personal characteristics, but it was better for the organization to actually let him go somewhere else and replace him with somebody who had been from the dirt road, merged onto the highway. Right? And that change, you can see great leaders do that really well. I always look at Facebook and say, Mark Zuckerberg, the thing that he did exceptionally well was scale his team well in advance of need, right? He had a guy who was a phenomenal COO, but he replaced him with Sheryl Sandberg, who was that much better, and she was going to be able to fill the much bigger shoes.
Great, yes?
How do you reset culture, to use your analogy here? How do you re-pour the foundation? If it needs to be, and I'll use the use case of later stage company CEO change, and the CEO has been brought in because there is a change that needs to be done. And so it seems like it's organ transplant. If you're doing a culture reset, how hard is that to do from your experience?
Great, and I think we're going to try to cover this topic as well, but why don't we just move on to that, which is, the question is, how do we reset the culture if we need to, in connection, for example, with the CEO change or otherwise?
Not to monopolize the conversation, I feel strongly about this because, you know, you have to recognize how is your culture. And so what's one good way to figure out what your culture is and how is it? Any ideas on that? Well, you could ask people. And so I thought culture is very, very important to me. I thought we had a great culture. We actually implemented a culture survey. And we went out and asked the employees, how does it feel to work here? Is this an environment where you can do your best? How likely are you to refer this company to a friend or to a friend? Is there clarity as to where we're going? Is it clear who's responsible for what? And I was shocked at some of the answers. I was shocked to learn that we were not doing well in many areas. But shocked, but also encouraged, because now you know what to work on. So my first recommendation is you actually ask the employees, and then you anonymize the responses so everybody feels compelled to answer. But I think there's two important things. One is it's important to get department information. Through the department information, we found out that we had the wrong leader in one of our departments who was not cascading or not reinforcing the culture at the department level. And the second is to ask how long people have been there, less than a year or greater than a year. Because less than a year tends to be higher net promoter score than longer than a year. Now, once we knew what was broken, then we knew where to target to fix it. So I think a great place to start is to survey the team.
Yeah, and I think there's building on what Gary said, I think there's other metrics that you can look at to determine whether your culture is going in the right direction or not. None of these are perfect. I think they have to be taken in totality. There's a good essay written by the founder of PowerSet called Cult Creation. And I don't know that I agree with everything in the essay, and I certainly have seen a lot of bad things done in the name of trying to build a cult at your company. But I think there's some interesting things there, and one of the things that he would say as a litmus test for his company is, do your employees actively want to have more ownership in the company? So he would give his employees the opportunity to kind of trade off cash and equity. And he said, you know, when things were going really well and people were really fired up and they were engaged and they were feeling good about the company, he'd be hit up all the time for, hey, I really want to get some more equity, I want to get some more equity. And then when those requests started to go away, it was like, I wonder if there's something off here. I wonder if there's, because at the end of the day, you don't always know what's going on in your organization as it scales. You don't know all the intricacies. And so when people started to say, I'm not sure I want to take as much equity this quarter, it's like, oh, that might be a sign. So things like, you know, net promoter score, things like this, you know, we think a lot about, you know, voluntary attrition as a metric. One of the stats I'm most proud about is in 3 years we haven't had any voluntary turnover, and I think looking at that as a metric is really, really useful as well. So thinking about this not just as a qualitative thing, but a quantitative thing.
I have two other tactical suggestions for people who are wrestling with this. Right. One of the things that we kind of, you know, always look at is whether or not the folks who are kind of on that middle cusp line, whether or not there are better fits for them somewhere else too. And so if in fact somebody is kind of a question mark and you can introduce them somewhere else, that's a very good way to kind of cleanse that and kind of take care of that problem very, very quickly and easily.
Yeah, Netflix calls that generous severance.
Yes.
Like, if you pay them to go, you're better off paying them to go.
Zappos actually does that in week 2, I believe, where they say, you know what, if we give you $2,000 right now, would you take it and go, or would you stay and commit to the culture and really be part of it? So.
Okay, great. So I think we've talked about now implementing a culture, trying to scale it, ensure that it remains consistent and so forth. I'm sure though as the company grows, we're going to start to run into a little bit of balancing, right? Because at some point there are trade-offs. And so maybe can we talk a little bit about your experiences around that, just as we continue to try to instill this as the company scales, what happens with respect to our ability to maintain that culture, and do we need to make trade-offs at some point? Thoughts on that?
Well, here we go again. So at IBM, they take you through this leadership development. And I remember when I was sitting in Armonk and I was going through it, I was, you know, counting ceiling tiles on the ceiling and saying this is a lot of bunk. And it turned out to be a really good foundation for kind of setting things up to scale. And I didn't realize it at the time, but looking back, this was 10 years ago, I realize now how valuable it was. And there's a handful of things that you can do as a leader to set yourself up for success. First and foremost is you have to have clarity as to where you're going. And if you can think about this in the most simplest of terms, just say you're going on a road trip. If you don't know where you're going, that's going to be a different road trip than, hey, we're going from point A to point B. We're driving from California to New York. The second thing you need to know is how are you going to get there? So you need to know what vehicle you're taking and what roads are you going to take? What route? What's your plan, right? Do you need to be in Colorado on day 5? Or it's good to outline this stuff. In the absence of that, your team can't operate effectively. They're going to be running in different directions. So clarity as to where you're going, clarity as to how you're going to get there. The next thing is who's responsible for what. You actually need to define this stuff. And I'll tell you an interesting story from our survey in a second, but you need to know who's responsible for what on this road trip, on this bus, in building your company. And then those people need to know how they should measure their success. How do they know whether or not they're doing a good job, right? How do you make it quantitative and qualitative? So those people know that they're making an impact, that they're doing the right thing. And the absence of those things can wreak havoc on your success and on your culture. And one example of this is at oDesk, I thought it was crystal clear, responsibilities were crystal clear. I had a document for every one of my executives saying, this is what you're responsible for, and this is how we're going to measure. And when we sent out our survey, people were very clear what they were responsible for. They were not clear what others were responsible for in the company. And that in and of itself was a lack of communication that derailed us. Didn't derail us, but it slowed us way down. So I had every executive in the company fill out a Google Doc with what they were responsible for and what they thought every other executive was responsible for. So marketing would say, this is what I do, and this is what I think ops does, this is what I think finance does, this is what I think the CEO does. We had 160 conflicts. We had 160 overlaps where marketing thought they were doing something, product also thought they were doing that same thing. That's a problem. It took us 90 days to resolve those conflicts. So just defining it, just knowing what's important and actually going through the mechanics of it, it seems really fundamental. But here, here I was with all of this great IBM training, and we hadn't done it. And this was just 3 years ago in our business that was scaling very, very aggressively. So as your company is growing, you have the right people on the bus. If you don't have those things defined, if you don't have clarity around those areas, that's going to create a problem as you scale.
I think the composition of the people on the bus changes over time too. So there's breakpoints at probably 10, at 50, at 100, at 200, at 500. And at each of those breakpoints, who you have on the bus has to change. So at 10, it's all rock stars. Everybody's a rock star, everybody's self-motivated, everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, and they're independent operators who are coming together as a team, but they're usually very capable of self-management, and you don't need to push them as much. When you get to 50 or 100, you start to get a distribution, right? You start to get a bit of a bell curve, and everybody hopes that their bell curve is shifted towards kind of high performers and rock stars, but at the end of the day, you do need this bell curve because there are some people who have to maintain everything. Not everybody needs to be working on the sexy new features that are coming out, and you might try to mix it up so that it's more fair. But at the end of the day, there's different personalities that lend themselves to different portions of the development process and different pieces, if you will, of kind of the overall picture. And so understanding how to manage each of those different levels of motivation, each of those different personality types as you go, I think is important to your culture, and being deliberate about what mix am I trying to set and why.
Great. David, any thoughts on just how you're able to scale the Zappos culture as well, maybe?
Well, I think everybody knows Zappos culture. You know, we're there to deliver wow. And so where are you going to have conflicts or sacrifice in the future? Deliver wow, right? And I'd like to just share a story that I think with young entrepreneurs and people that are starting up a company, what I figured out that there's really 4 things that you need to do. And I'll put it in real life with a story from a personal friend, great friend, and a weekly golfing buddy. Does anybody know Roger Smith? Okay. He was founder and CEO and president of Silicon Valley Bank. Has anybody heard of that bank? Okay. 1983, he worked at Wells Fargo, and all the startups couldn't get loans from Wells Fargo or any other bank. And so he said, there's a real need. So number 1 with a startup, try to create a solution. Okay? So that's what he did. So he said, you know what, I don't want to start another crappy bank. I want to have a bank not with customers, but with clients. And so what he did is he created a solution and became customer-centric. Okay, and the 2 other things you need to do as a startup, write it down, reduce effort, create a better experience, or create an experience like a disruptor. 4 things: find a solution, customer-centric, reduce effort. And what's the other one?
Great experience.
Okay, Perfect. So this is what Roger did. In my book, I articulate a little bit more granular with vision, purpose, values, business model, and unique factors. But here's Silicon Valley Bank. This is in 1983, on the 1983 paper. Silicon Valley Bank, service statement. This is what he wrapped his culture around. Each client will have a banker with an alternate banker. That's unique in the industry. Banks didn't do that. Each employee will have clients assigned to them. Each client will be treated in the same manner as we would treat a good friend. Our treatment of clients and potential clients will be consistent whether in person, on the telephone, or in written communication. Banks always say no, so this one handles that. We will strive to accommodate our clients' needs by handling a transaction, referring to it to our friends if appropriate, or counseling with our client to re-examine their needs. Training of our staff will be continually available to allow each of us to do our jobs in the most professional manner. This is what Silicon Valley Bank in 1983 wrapped their culture around. So what sacrifices along the way needs to be made with something like this?
Operating margin.
Okay, you know, we got to nudge things along the way, but if we stay aligned with what the blueprint, right, Gary, that we created initially, and things aren't as attractive sometimes as they get nearer, so you can change things around. But if you clearly articulate, say, this is what we do, this is how we do it, just keep doing it. And as long as it's aligned with being customer-centric, you're reducing effort, you're creating a better experience, and you're solving a solution, game over, home run. Okay, any questions around scaling? Yes?
I have a curiosity of how much each of you invest in culture, and if you had to ballpark, and in what specific ways you see your company investing in culture, and at what point you think that it's appropriate to invest in a role to be a cross-departmental, full organizational steward of the culture in a strategic manner.
Yeah, so I'll tell you what I think we do well and what I think we do poorly. So I think what we do well is we approach a lot of our interactions with team from the perspective of looking out for what's in their best interests. So I'll use a story from the sports world. When I married my wife, she's from Kentucky. I'm a huge basketball fan. I got to adopt the Kentucky Wildcats as my team. Go Cats. That was a fun thing to do. I got really fascinated by John Calipari, the coach for Kentucky, because every single year he's able to recruit the absolute best players out of high school. And how does that happen? Year in, year out, the best people in high school basketball want to go work for Coach Cal. And there was a great article written, which I posted to our blog a while back, where what happened was the players that played for Coach Cal, they came to realize that Coach Cal always had their best interests at the top of his mind. So when they would come after their freshman season, they go to Coach Cal, they say, hey, should I turn pro? Well, if you're Coach Cal, do you want those guys turning pro? No, you want to have them come back for their sophomore, junior, senior year. But he didn't do that. He said, look, based on how good of a player you are, where you're going to go in the draft, your family's financial situation, you should go pro. Even though it might have been to his short-term loss.
One and done.
One and done, right? But then what happened is every single year players would talk. So then the players would talk to other players and say, hey, if you want a coach who's going to look out for your best interest, go play for Coach Cal. And so every single year he gets these amazing, amazing players. So I think taking that mindset into your interactions with your team, no one's going to work for you forever. They're going to go on and they're going to do something else. If you can approach that from a team-centric, we've talked about customer-centric, a team-centric mindset, I think that's fantastic. I think we do an incredible job of that at Entelo. What we haven't done as much of at 21 employees is the formalization of it. So actually sitting down and building a culture deck. I know a lot of people now do that, especially in the wake of Netflix and Patty's deck. Actually having sessions to dive into what is our culture. We haven't done a lot of that. I think we should. We will. I think we do some of it inherently, but a lot of it we don't do as formally as we probably could.
Just one quick thing to add, as you scale, it gets a lot harder to spend time on it because you have so many priorities as a CEO, but setting it up right in the first place is really important. If you don't have those skills, if you as the CEO aren't passionate about it, you should align yourself with somebody who is, right? Tony Shay aligned himself with Dr. Vic to help establish and reinforce it at Zappos. And it's really important that you do that because it can get out of control very quickly. If people don't know what it is, if you're not constantly reinforcing it, communicating it, cascading it down through the organization, you can end up with a department issue like we did. We had a vice president who wasn't really aligned with the culture, he wasn't cascading it, he was sending a different message to his team. Along the lines of what John was saying, I think the CEO has to care about the employees, and care about the employees, I think, is 4 things. Employees want impact, they want growth and development, they want good financial reward, and they want balance. And those priorities vary by employee. They're not the same for every single person. Somebody may want more impact and they don't care about balance because they're young, they don't have kids, whatever. But as employees get older, they start having kids, they may care more about balance than they do financial reward or impact or even growth or development. So I think it's really important that you understand that and that you make sure that you're offering people that. And in this case, with the basketball player, impact, financial reward, growth and development would have been better for that player going pro than staying on the team. Even though it was worse for the team, it was better for the person in the long run. And I think that's fundamental for the CEO to recognize what it is that people want and make sure that you're giving it to them while you're creating a valuable business, right?
Yeah, I see a lot of companies, and I would say maybe 1% intentionally articulates their culture. Maybe 1%. People like to talk about it. There's a lot of this stuff going on. And so I challenge you, I mean, how difficult is this? Difficult? No, not at all. Well, then do it. I challenge you to do it, and you can get somebody on site that will champion it, or get an advisor that will guide it along. But there's just an awful lot of talk, too much talk in the industry. The culture is so important, and we've seen companies really drive it to the max with great culture, but nobody really does anything to it. The reason I went down to Zappos, I helped seed the company. I was retired, and so I went down there because I delivered WOW in the clinic that I had, and it allowed me to retire. So Zappos was delivering WOW for some reason, so I said, let's go ahead and drive this. So that's why I went down, because I knew how powerful getting everybody aligned on the same page, doing the same thing, delivering WOW could be. So there's a lot of people that don't do it. It's so powerful. You got to stop talking about it.
I would say when you're small too, you can figure out who on your team is excited about different things. So, for instance, I'm probably better at one-on-one meetings with people who've been there for a couple months, making sure that I understand where they want to go with their career, things like that. I hate ping pong tables and like whatever that cornhole game is, but a lot of people like those, and so one of my co-founders loves that kind of stuff. So even within like the executive committee, we sort of divide on what we're interested in. So I think part of it has to be genuine. So you're asking like, when do you bring somebody in? It can't feel forced. It has to feel really genuine. And I think sometimes it could be somebody from within that becomes, you start to see them propelling that, and maybe they're propelling it and they're really hitting a note with the people who you're recently hiring at a certain phase. So people who are maybe motivated by whatever phase the company's in. I think you can find people from within that maybe do as good of a job as bringing in someone from the outside, and it might be a little bit more seamless.
Yes.
So I'll ask you a question and make one quick comment, if I may. So on the topic of scale, you talked about scaling up, but we're in the valley, and so sometimes you have to scale down as well. And how to keep the company going in that situation is very important. So I work for a solar photovoltaic company, and we grew very fast. We got a ton of venture funding, grew to 110 people, and then it's a very tough industry. In 2013, our funding dried up. We had to take the company to 40 people. Now we've been acquired. We're restarting the company, and the team amazingly has stayed together. And I think they've stayed together because they like each other, and because they believe in the technology. Not only the technology being a good technology, a superior technology, but being good for the world. So I've been wondering, why is the team staying together and excited about the restart? even though everybody's stock options were wiped out. That's because we like each other and we believe in the technology.
Yeah, it's intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? The team is fired up by the belief in what you're doing, not necessarily other things that might be external. We buy a copy of Ben Horowitz's book for all of our new employees. So The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and I mean, that's a guy who went through some shit, right? And so I think preparing the team for, especially people that have never worked in a startup before. If you worked in a big company, you know, your variance day to day is this. You know, you work in a startup, your variance hour to hour can be this, right? So how do you prepare people that have never been in a startup for the fact that you might have to lay people off at some point in time? That they may have to work all weekend every once in a while to get a project done. Because if they've never been in a startup before, they may not understand that.
Okay, yes.
My question is similar to that one. In my company, we're a bootstrap company. We are already at 35, and I feel that the startup culture is everywhere. The CEO is a startup guy who has founded many companies. And when do we change from startup culture to corporate culture? When does that happen? When do you notice that it's needed? Because I feel that if you have 30 guys playing on the, doing the PlayStation thing, it's not a company at that point. So how to do it and where does it change?
That doesn't necessarily sound to me like a startup versus corporate culture thing. That sounds like a specific startup culture. And maybe we can talk to you afterwards about the specific case, but in terms of corporate culture, thinking about, the heavier balance looking folks out of your four different metrics there, I'm hoping that doesn't happen to us until we're in the thousands, right? If that happens before then, it is gonna make me sad. That part, I feel like, when you say corporate culture where there's politics, there's the perception of, okay, people need balance, everyone wants to leave by 6, that kind of thing, that still hasn't happened for most of Google. And it's a 50,000 person company, right? So Larry is pushing against that happening. That's kind of what he battles with. And he's trying never to allow it to slip into corporate culture.
Based on the way you asked the question, my answer was going to be never, right? Never let that happen.
I'm going to take a slightly different tack and hopefully won't go into too controversial territory here, but we've been thinking and talking a lot recently about diversity in companies. We launched a product called Entelo Diversity a couple weeks ago, which really for us made us do a really deep dive into this. And I think one of the things you do need to think about as you scale it, are you creating a culture that is going to be a welcoming place for a diverse range of employees? So to say, everyone cranking on PlayStation, like that strikes me as you probably have 90% men in your company today. I'm just guessing, So one of the things that Google did incredibly well early on is they created a culture that brought a lot of fantastic women onto their engineering team. No coincidence that one of them now runs Yahoo, right? So think a little bit about that piece, because there is this notion, you see this a lot in Silicon Valley, where a lot of these startups feel like frat houses, right? And that's gonna work maybe when you're 10 people, it ain't gonna work when you're 100, certainly isn't gonna work when you're 1,000. So that is a piece that I would be conscious of at this stage.
Okay, let me address one other topic first, and then we can go open it up more generally again, and then stop and let people come and talk to the panel. We've talked a lot about just internally within the organization. What about, if anyone has any brief comments around how we interact with our other stakeholders, like our board members, around this topic? Do we even have those conversations? Does this come up at all? To what extent does it come up? And if so, what is the conversation? Is there concern about the expense involved in making these investments, or is it that they're trying to drive the company to adopt a better culture? What are those conversations right now, if any?
I would just say if the board is trying to drive the company to adopt a better culture, you have a big problem. If it's come up to the board level and they're having to tell you as founders, you need to fix this, then you know, it's come to a place where, yeah, you really need to fix it. For board management, I think the best defense is a good offense, and picking the right person, taking the time to pick the right person. So when we were raising our A last July, I interviewed 23 different founders and CEOs in one weekend. We got our term sheets on Friday, and we were supposed to make the decision by Monday, and I wanted to know from people who had failed with this board member, you know, in other ventures, how did they react? What did they say? What did they do? How did they help? How did they not help? And so picking that right person from the very beginning and knowing what you're looking for and really going after, if you have the luxury, that particular type of person, that's, I think, you know, solves probably 80% of the issues if you do it up front.
Get back to those personal characteristics that you're looking for in team members. You want those same personal characteristics in your board members. And the way that you treat your employees with fairness, with integrity, with open and honest communication, with full candor, that's the way your culture is going to be set. So if that, and that's the way you should communicate with your board, and that's how you want your board communicating with you. And I agree that you know, offense is good here. So I shared the results of our culture deck. Our board didn't care. They were like, whatever, we know you're on this stuff. So I tend to put too much in the window. If I were hiding that stuff from my board, that would be a flag on the field. So I just think that open and honest and fair, and yes, you should get those right people on the bus in the first place. That should be the board that you build.
Okay, questions? Yes?
So there was a point made earlier about distinctive culture, right? More than the basics, choices that people are making. And one implication of those choices is usually consequences. So could you maybe share an example or two of trade-offs you made when actively setting your culture, something that worked well for the company but came with trade-offs that you actively debated?
So what trade-offs were made in adopting the culture or in implementing the culture?
So we, when we were smaller, I'm going to say we were probably about 30 people at the time, everybody was involved with major decisions. And it was very sort of consensus driven. We'd get everybody together, everybody would weigh in. And once we made a decision, we would commit to that decision. So 2 by 2, you know, don't commit, commit. Don't agree, agree, right? And so whether you agree with the decision or not, we're committing to that decision and we move on, right? And what we found is that as you grow, it just got more time consuming. You couldn't have everybody involved in the decision. And we had a lot of no decisions as a result because we couldn't decide on things, and so we would sort of table them, and that was really bad. We weren't moving as fast as we could have moved, and we weren't taking enough chances. And I started thinking back to my days at IBM, and that's what happens at IBM. You get 26 people in a room, not everybody agrees, and they say, well, let's bring this up next week, and you're like, oh, come on, are you kidding me? And then I realized we were doing that. So we got to a point where we said, you know, let's, another 2 by 2, no action, action, fail, succeed, right? So let's look at those buckets. No action, fail. Congratulations, you deserve to fail, you did nothing. No action, succeed. Congratulations, you got lucky this time, good luck on the next one. You just flipped a coin and came up heads that you called heads, good for you. Action, fail. Hey, you took action. It didn't work out the way you planned, but did you learn from it? Are you going to do it different next time and take that as a learning opportunity and now make a better decision? And action, succeed, you called it right, you did it right, congratulations, you win. And what we started doing was saying, if the decision is reversible, meaning it's not pricing, it's not the Netflix, we're going to cleave Flickster and Quickster and, you know, or Quickster and Netflix and create 2 companies and let's just go and do that. That's not that reversible, although I would argue, look where they are as a result of that decision. It could have been implemented better, but they made a decision, they failed, they learned from it, and their stock was the biggest gaining stock in 2013. So if it's reversible, make a quick decision, push that decision as low as you can in the organization, empower people to make those decisions. If it's irreversible, you probably want to have a little bit more rigor, a little bit more observe and orient before you decide and act. Right? And so we put that framework in place, and it was phenomenal. It was empowering for the employees. We were hiring people, and they were saying, wait a second, I get to make a decision on what keywords we buy? Yeah, that's what we hired you for, and we're going to measure you based on the keywords you buy. Go make decisions. You go do it. You don't have to check with your boss. You can just go do that. And so I think that's really important, that you have a framework for pushing decision-making as low as you can in the organization. And even if there's negative consequences, you move fast, you learn. And nowadays, with a lot of internet businesses, you can A/B test everything. I want a certain landing page, the team wants something else. Well, let's go test mine and see how it does. They never do better. And so it's so great that we can test it with 5% traffic and see what happens.
I think one trade-off that every company makes, whether it's conscious or subconscious, is what is the expectation around FaceTime in the office? You know, are people showing up, expected to show up at 8 a.m. and work till 9 p.m., right? When we started our company, my co-founder and I, we both have young children. So we made a conscious decision to say, look, we're going to work hard. We have to work hard. We'll die if we don't work hard. But it's not going to be an expectation that everyone is going to be in the office until 8 or 9 p.m. every night, because we just didn't want to make that trade-off. But don't get me wrong, like I think about that all the time. And it scares me that maybe we lose at some point because we don't have a culture like some cultures in the Valley where people are working nights, weekends all the time. Now there's a flip side to that. We might be able to attract employees that do have families, that are really talented, that don't want to go work in an environment where they're required to live at the office. You know, our team may not burn out at the rate that some of the startups in the Valley burn out. So that's a very conscious, well, for us it was a conscious trade-off, but I think for many companies, they don't think about the implications of something like that.
Yeah, I'd say we're in the same boat, being called UrbanSitter. A lot of us have young children. And we have UrbanSitters to cover for us when we work late. But one of the interesting things that's come out of it, because we're definitely a work smarter, not longer culture, just because we're forced to, because many of us have young kids. And so I was really worried about how that would scale as we got bigger. And we're definitely, like, people are there, I would say kind of it's a 8:30 to 5:30 culture. People are kind of gone for a little while, and then people are back online. And as we've grown, what I found is we've actually been able to attract some really interesting young talent. I was worried, like, would we be able to hire people who don't have kids? And we have people who, a guy's in a band and they practice from 6 to 8 twice a week. We have someone who likes to go ride before it gets dark out. And so even though the company culture that that embraces how the co-founders have to live today, I was worried that would sort of deter people from coming to our company, but actually we've embraced it and we've been able to attract really interesting talent who have other interests that are sort of on that same time schedule, and we've been able to attract some incredible technical talent, people who want to work at a startup and be early on the team, but they do have kids, and so they also don't want to work for the 22-year-old. They've done that and they want to be somewhere a little bit more mature. So we've actually, it's flipped into our favor, and I hope it's something we can continue as we grow. Again, sort of what I was saying, I found that certain people who, like, there are some people in the office that really want to work hard and work late, and I've kind of made one of them the captain of the work late team. So, like, he knows he's got a budget to buy food and take people out for drinks and whatever, because I can't be there to do that. But I think it's kind of figuring out what works for your organization, and there are trade-offs. I think about it all the time, that I'm not there at 7 o'clock at night, and so now I've adjusted my schedule, so a couple times a week I am there late, just to make sure the people that are there feel that as well.
She has a good point, and feel free with your cultures, kind of figure out how you want it to be. You know, what is it going to look like when it grows up? And you can declare really anything you want. There's a lid for every pot, just like when people come in the office like that. So don't be scared. Just kind of declare what you want your culture to be like, and then it'll attract those type of people, and it'll become self-managing. You'll be really surprised. But you have to declare something, otherwise you're not setting the expectations for anybody to want to come and come in the future. Yes?
Yeah, I had a question about scaling as well. I was the first hire for a very early startup. There were no investors yet, just a vision, some real talented people. And that first year working there, it was a little bit of a volunteer type job. There wasn't much of a paycheck either, but it was just an incredible experience, because you were able to just jump into things. You were given total responsibility. And once sort of the seed funding, the Series A happened, you started to see things change to where now we were talking about money and value for the money. There's sort of the sheen wore off on the mission, because you now actually got customer feedback and you realized maybe you weren't quite exactly on point of what you were delivering to the customer. And then you also had new executives showing up, so it started to become a little bit more political, and I started seeing people sucking up to the founders, and the founders still loved, of course, the company. And I'm kind of wondering, does that mean there was a shift in culture, or does that just mean that's just the normal part of growing up?
It's probably somewhere in between, right? I think there is going to be some of that that's going to happen. Talking about money, we sell SaaS, software licenses, and so our salespeople talk a lot about money, the deals they're closing, right? But guess what? That money is what pays the lights and the heat and the rent so that we can build the product. And Zuckerberg had a great quote about this, I think right around the time that Facebook was going public, which said, we don't strive to make money for its own purpose. We strive to make money to be able to build a better product, because if we didn't make money, we couldn't continue to do what we do. So some of that is normal, but then I also think that there might be some pieces in what you described that might be indicative of a less than healthy culture as well.
Okay, actually I think we should pause here and give an applause to our panel here.